Okay, good morning to everyone joining our panel discussion today. My name is Anthony Hughes and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Tech Elevator. We're a software developer training program working with individuals and companies to reskill non-technical individuals into technology roles. Until recently, we taught out of locations throughout the Midwest and on the East Coast, as well as on-site at our corporate partners. As you would now expect, we are teaching fully remote and live through various tools such as the one we're using today, Zoom. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who's joining us today for a discussion around rethinking hiring strategy in uncertain times. With the COVID crisis upon us, we've been hosting a lot of discussions about how individuals can navigate a turbulent job market and the challenges of quarantine on productivity. Now we thought we could offer value to our network of hiring partners and the broader community on this particular topic. A few announcements before we get started. During the registration, we collected questions that you might have for the panelists. Thank you to those of you who submitted those questions. For the purpose of a smooth discussion today, we will be turning off the live Q&A function, but we'll be embedding the questions that you submitted into the panel discussion today. Everybody should be able to see the panelist videos on the screen and you will be muted for the discussion. We'll go through for an hour. We have a little bit of time on the back end of this conversation. If it's a great conversation, we'll just keep going, and we've got a hard end at 12:30 today. So here we are, we find ourselves facing what are unprecedented times. The full effect of COVID will not be known for months to come, perhaps years. And right now, it's fair to say that we are in a crisis. It was just a matter of weeks ago that the national unemployment rate stood at 3.6%. Today, that rate stands at nearly 20%. With the news today, we're up to 26.5 million unemployment claims that have been submitted throughout March and April. Social distancing and the effects that are being made to stem the spread of virus are wreaking havoc in our economy, but not uniformly. Some companies are laying workers off. Other companies are in fact making bold statements about their hiring needs and are being aggressive in their growth. And all of it's happening against a backdrop of social distancing. Hiring and firing must take place remotely. And with this new norm come risks and opportunities. So today we're excited to learn from three experienced and respected leaders at their various companies. These are individuals who Tech Elevator and companies who Tech Elevator have had strong and enduring relationships with. So with that, let me give some background on the panelists that are going to be joining us today. The first is Ralph Schriver. Ralph is the head of software engineering for Bayer Radiology in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Bayer Radiology is a division of Bayer Pharmaceuticals. When we think of the crisis that we're facing now, we think of the heroes on the front line of the health crisis. Those heroes are aided and the patient lives are being saved by heroic machines. And those machines are connected to the world through software and through the internet. And they're increasingly powered by software. Ralph is one of the great minds behind these machines. In his case, he's supporting the field of radiology. Ralph has over 25 years of experience in research and development. He manages a team of over 80 developers globally. He has led a large and diverse functional organizations in software engineering, systems engineering, mechanical engineering, and advanced development. And he's contributed to the development of over 10 Class II medical devices. He is a co-inventor on over 25 US patents and holds a BS and MS, an active Pennsylvania professional engineering license in mechanical engineering and machine design. We're also joined today by Jane Shaw. Jane is an IT manager at Progressive Insurance. She holds a special place in the hearts of Tech Elevator because it was Jane who hired our first ever graduate nearly 5 years ago. On Friday, she will celebrate her 20th anniversary with Progressive, where she started, again, 20 years ago as an IT project manager. 10 years ago, she started the intern and associate hire program and has served as the program manager since then. Her responsibilities include hiring associate programmers, test engineers, and IT analysts, establishing a strong employer brand and developing relationships with over 20 colleges, universities, as well as coding boot camps. and she sets up her new associates for success by providing them with exceptional onboarding experience, as well as continued support as they adapt and integrate with Progressive's culture. To date, Jane has hired and onboarded 300 associates, as well as managing over 200 interns. Finally, our last panelist is Chuck Xenakis. Chuck is the Executive Director of Recruiting at JPMorgan Chase for the Global Technology Group. He started his career as a headhunter in the days before email and internet were mainstream. He now has over 23 years of experience in various recruiting roles. 13 years ago, Chuck joined JPMorgan Chase, and today he's responsible for delivering end-to-end solutions to hire around 3,000 technologists annually in Chicago, Columbus, Dallas, and Houston as the technology recruiting director at JPMorgan Chase. And during his 13 years at the firm, he specialized in technology recruiting, but also has led recruiting for digital analytics, marketing, and finance. Chuck is a man after my own heart. He's a big foodie and an avid craft beer enthusiast. So these are our panelists. Now, before we get into the conversation, I just want to give some continued remarks on the state of the economy and where we are right now. So, as I mentioned before, on a national level, the unemployment rates, the jobless claims, are at a staggering 26 million claims filed. However, we also know that the effects of COVID are far from even. According to Oxford research, travel, food services, and brick-and-mortar retail make up 15 million of those claims, while information services make up less than 100,000. At the same time, according to Indeed postings from the prior year against now, postings for developer roles are actually down by 25%, with the largest pullbacks in postings being in the startup ecosystem. So while those are some of the national numbers, what I thought I would do is provide some additional context for what we're experiencing at Tech Elevator, because we have over 400 companies that we work with and have very close relationships with. So from our perspective, as we reached out to our hiring partners to get an understanding of what their hiring activity looks like. And we've also been measuring activity through engagement with our recently graduated students. So every year we have a big event, or 3 times a year we have a big event. It's called Matchmaking. And we have that 3 times a year at our 6 campuses. We saw 80 companies attend Matchmaking, hosting about 1,500 interviews. And year on year, that attendance was actually down by about 18%. Our hiring partners are heavily weighted towards enterprise companies, where we've seen some pretty good resiliency in the economy. About 90% of them are in that field, in the sort of finance, IT, logistics sectors. Even so, we have seen some companies pull back. A notable example of a big hiring company would be GE Aviation, an organization hit not just by the effect of COVID on world trade, but also on travel, and also, with the issues that were being faced by Boeing as well. So sometimes the COVID is the second punch that's pulling some companies out after the trade war did some damage sort of early on. We've also talked to a number of our colleagues in the bootcamp industry and found that colleagues in Boston, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Austin, those are some of the boot camps that are facing some of the biggest crises around hiring and placement, because they're heavily dependent on the startup ecosystem. And lastly, what we've seen in terms of placement rates as a company, hiring of our graduates, typically at a graduation, we would typically see around 35 to 40% of our graduates with job offers in hand. At the graduation of our spring cohorts, we actually saw about 29% placed. So a little bit of a softening, some of it due to a delayed hiring process and onboarding process for companies, and other parts of it due to companies that have just said that they're on pause for hiring right now. So I wanted to provide that extra context from Tech Elevator with a network of 400 hiring companies. But now I'd like to hear from our panelists about their particular experiences. With that said, let me turn over to our panelists and ask kind of the first and most obvious question, which is, are you still hiring? And let me start with Jane Jane Shaw, rather, from Progressive Insurance.
So yes, thank you very much, Anthony. And yes, we are still hiring. I personally had over 40 offers already extended before we were hit with COVID, and that was for full time, and 27 intern offers that had been extended. And initially, the first decision made was Progressive is absolutely going to keep our commitment to those offers and figure out a way to make this work. But I can tell you that we also had have several openings in our IT organization, and we didn't pull one of those job recs off the board. We kept them going. Since COVID, I have hired 5 additional to the 40 that I have starting over the summer. And that's just me, and I just hire the entry-level talent. Some of my counterparts or coworkers are hiring at the senior and lead level and even consultant level when it comes to IT talent. So yes, we are still full steam ahead. We have a lot of projects that we need to get done this year. And so we are looking for some great talent for sure.
Great. Ralph, I know your organization is a little smaller in terms of scale than, say, Progressive or JPMorgan Chase, but I'd be curious from your perspective, particularly in the industry that you're in, healthcare, what does the hiring outlook look like for Bayer?
Yeah, well, obviously Bayer is a huge a global company with something like 104,000 employees, 44 billion in annual revenue. But the area where I work, Bayer Radiology in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a little bit smaller. I think about 1.6 billion in annual revenue. My organization, software engineering, which I could speak to, certainly still hiring. Like Jane, we made some offers prior to the crisis, and we're fulfilling those offers. We're trying to find creative ways to onboard those folks. Have something like around 8 positions or so in flight at various stages, some offers made and accepted, and trying to find creative ways to bring those folks on board. And then a handful that we're still interviewing, just did some interviewing yesterday, in fact, with some folks. So yeah, we're just all trying to figure out creative ways to fill the spots. As Jane mentioned, we have a ton of in-flight projects, and we want to really find ways to design and develop new products from home and change medicine and save lives. That's our business. So yeah, we're continuing full steam ahead as well.
Great. Chuck, what about for JPMorgan Chase?
Yeah, we too are still hiring. When COVID hit, we do what all companies do, is you kind of assess where you are from a talent perspective. Just like Ralph and Jane were saying, we still have a ton of technology projects that have to get done, and COVID has actually sprung up a ton more projects that we had to immediately shift resources to get done. So we did go through a review of all of our technology recs globally, and yeah, we did shed some of them, but we still have nearly 2,000 open technology roles across the globe that our team is still competing with Ralph and Jane and all the other companies out there for this very limited pool of talent.
Great. Okay. So in terms of this audience, we're all still hiring. So now let's talk about how we're adjusting to this sort of new reality. So I'll start with a question submitted by Jim Snyder, technology manager at PNC. What are you doing that you weren't doing 2 months ago in terms of the hiring outreach? And I know there's a lot of different sort of pieces to the answer there, but maybe I can start with you, Jane.
So what we're doing that we weren't doing 2 months ago is we are, all of our hiring practices we are doing remotely. One of the selling points for us always is to try to get candidates into our space so that they can actually come and see our fabulous work environment. We have an incredible work environment. As soon as you walk in, I know, Anthony, you've been there, you've seen it. It feels like a place like, this is where I want to work, right? And so moving to a fully remote recruiting process has been a little bit more difficult in that sense. And so all interviews are being done using WebEx. It's nice because we can still see body language and which is helpful during the interview process. I'm sure everyone knows. Then the next thing that's changed dramatically is the onboarding process. We definitely have to get very creative, as Ralph and Chuck were both saying too, on how can we get people onboarded and acclimated to our culture, to the project teams. I think the project teams are doing great remotely because they've been working together. So they've built those relationships, they have them, and now we're introducing new talent to the teams. And so we're getting very creative on how to make sure that these new hires feel included and part of the team.
That's great. I'm curious, for some of you, you've been doing sort of the early stages of the interview process, WebEx or Zoom interviewing, just to try and be efficient in the process. But, there may then have been a point where it made sense to, invite somebody to, come to Cleveland, Ohio, come to, Dallas or Pittsburgh or various other places and have that sort of experience, meet their colleagues, walk through the halls, see the facilities. So, I'd love to hear, how are you replacing the sizzle that, that's part of the sales experience of recruiting great talent. So how are you able to replicate that? I'd love to hear, Chuck, maybe what you guys have been thinking about. How do you give that candidate experience in this online world?
Just like we're doing today, we utilize Zoom or other technologies to bring our folks together. I know, I've heard so many anecdotes of things that teams are doing to build those bonds, to build that culture, to keep those connection points. Virtual happy hours, bringing some levity to meetings where people, get to bring a bit more of themselves to the workplace. I think that, COVID has pushed us into this, right? Right now, everybody has a peek into all of our homes. That's not something you would normally see. I can tell you, I've never seen the inside of any of my employees' homes. So it's been quite unique to pull this together to build the culture. But again, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that, everybody is on board to do the right thing for the right reasons. And it's often the hard way to go, but it's very important.
I would imagine that, there are also opportunities around this as well. And there's a heavy amount, particularly from, Jane and Chuck's perspective, kind of stewarding the recruiting process of coordination and trying to find the right people at the right time. And there are physical constraints as you move further down the funnel. I know, Ralph, you're probably getting involved after sort of some of the early recruiting has happened. Are you seeing opportunities to bring your colleagues together in this sort of post-COVID world, in this remote world, in a more efficient manner, to speed up the process of bringing a new candidate in?
Well, if you look at recruiting, so just take a step back. So one of the tools in our toolbox, one of the most powerful tools in our toolbox is always, hey, we find some young talent through a college or a recommendation or something like that. And maybe without even a position open, we would ask that person to come to our campus and kick the tires, exactly what, from the discussion before. Our campus in Indianola, Pennsylvania, we have some really, really cool toys. We have robotics and 3D printers and automation and virtual reality. And we actually have a human factors engineering lab with all the one-way glass and stuff. So for an aspiring design engineer to be able to walk into a human factors engineering lab and stand behind one-way glass and watch something that you might have designed or invented be used by a real technologist or medical practitioner and be able to see that, that's really, really powerful, right? And that's easy to sell the company, easy to sell Bayer, easy to sell Bayer Radiology when they can experience that. And now we don't have that, right? So we don't have that tool in our toolbox. So we're doing other things. I mean, it's no accident that I'm wearing a very loud Bayer Radiology hackathon shirt today, right? So these are the types of things we do to inspire folks to draw folks into our organization. That things like hackathons, a 3-day sort of free-for-all where we invent real-time, code real-time around the clock, try to design and develop new products on the fly, if you will, and then sort of have a Shark Tank environment where we pitch those to the executive management. So we do lots of crazy things, and now we're having to use different ways to sell and communicate that to the potential hires, just like we're doing today.
It's great to hear. I'm curious, obviously you're developing your own best practices, you're developing, your own sort of ways to adapt. Are there any best practices that you went right to when you had to adapt to this world? Are there best practices that you can share with our viewers today that you've observed out there, other companies that you think are doing it really well, or best practices that you've really admired in the sort of this new virtual world?
You want me to take it one?
So Anthony, I'll give kudos to Tech Elevator. Through the matchmaking. This was the first online matchmaking event, and it was right after COVID hit. And JPMorgan Chase, like many companies, quickly brought on technologies like Zoom. But we're also a very secure environment. So we did not turn on external access for Zoom for any of our employees. And after being in that matchmaking event where people were placed into the various breakout rooms, and just seeing how smoothly that technology worked, I immediately went to our cyber and infrastructure team and said, look, I need access from my team to be able to host interview days in this manner. We discussed it. We discussed the, how to make sure that those stay secure, right? So that folks can't just Zoom bomb us or anything like that. And we implemented it like in 3 days. So, took a best practice from Tech Elevator, implemented at JPMorgan Chase, and we've already held a multitude of virtual interview days.
Wow, that's super cool. Hey, glad we could be of help there. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? Or whatever the expression is. Yeah, Jane, looks like you had something you wanted to share.
No, same. As far like 3 days before kind of the orders came down and the stay-at-home orders came down, I was going to be doing a showcase at Tech Elevator, and absolutely appreciated, like we had to scramble quickly, but we were able to I was still able to meet with all your students virtually, talk about Progressive, the job openings that we had, and so wasn't my favorite way to do it. Because I like to be in front of people and surrounded by them, but it worked because we did get a lot of interest in the positions that we had. So if we have to do that again with the next cohort, we absolutely will.
Great. So sometimes it's about the necessity, and other times, when you're forced into these situations, this disruption, forces us to sort of change the status quo, if you will. So there's a question from Tracy Rood, an IT recruiting manager from Everest Technologies, who's asked, how do you feel this will change your hiring practices when this is all over? What will be the legacies as you return back to, in a post-COVID world? What will be the legacies of this experience? And what do you think, what you don't want to give up in terms of what, this world has enabled or required?
So I can tell you I don't want to give up virtual interviewing. I think that has been something that we didn't really understand the total value of it until this hit. And I think lasting effect is going to be our efficiency to onboard people post-hire in a remote way if needed, and just all the things that we learned about ourselves and our own technology capabilities. I think that, when things do return to whatever the new normal is, we're going to be even in a better place to push that gas pedal down further.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm curious, in terms of, when we think about the risks and opportunities in all of these situations. So, I'd love to kind of get a sense of, where, from a sourcing and recruiting standpoint, you've identified risks that this new kind of norm that we're in present, but equally, some of the opportunities. Maybe I'll start with the opportunities, because I have to imagine, kind of, Ralph, in the world of like healthcare, that our front line in this battle truly are the healthcare workers of America. I wonder if there have been opportunities to open folks' eyes to the role of software development in healthcare, in saving lives, and has that given you some advantages in recruiting Bayer, as an example?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, it's something we talk a lot about at Bayer Radiology, as I mentioned earlier, are kind of we have a lot of different mottos at Bayer, but certainly we are changing medicine and saving lives every day. And there's no sort of greater place to be in the middle of a pandemic, right, than actually working on products that are immediately going to returning to service or freeing up hospital workers to do their to do their job, enabling their job. A lot of our software programs are aimed at actually optimizing workflow, for example. So every time we make it easier for a technologist or a medical professional to do their job, that actually excuse me, gives them more time to spend with a patient or treat a patient. So certainly for us, more awareness of how important the first responders are, the frontline medical workers are. It just only helps us from a recruiting standpoint, from a brand reputation, as well as employee morale. We haven't talked about that much, but all of my team at home, someone watching this probably, you get a huge sense of reward knowing that they're having an impact on patients' lives, every single day. And that's helpful in times like these.
That's great. I think employer brand is a question that I'd love to put to to Jane first, and also to Chuck. Like, what are opportunities to build an employer brand for companies right now? You guys are clearly hiring, which is sort of bucking the trend of kind of the doom and gloom that we're seeing in the news right now. So maybe we can start with Jane. Tell me about the opportunities to build employer brand right now.
Well, I think the first opportunity is the fact that, like Chuck and Ralph, we are keeping our commitments. So when you think about offers that were made prior to the situation, I am hearing because I work with so many college students from the intern program and the new associate hire program, my inbox started getting filled up. Are you still going to have the intern program? Does my offer still stand? And I could hear the anxiety and the concern in those emails. And in fact, even my phone rang a few times, which is very unusual for a college student to phone you, right? I didn't even know they knew how to do that anymore, right? So, and as I spoke with some of the students, what I was hearing from them is, I'm so grateful that Progressive is going to continue, because my 3 or 4 of my friends' internship programs were canceled, and offers actually had been rescinded. And so we'd never like to improve your employment brand at the cost of someone else's, having to make those tough decisions, because I'm sure these companies labored over having to actually rescind offers and terminate internship programs. However, the fact that we were able to continue gives a little more credence to the large steady, kind of stable companies versus the startups so for once, I think we look a little more sexy, right? Because we're actually going to be able to have the program and give the experience and pay these folks. And so, and I know, Anthony, you've heard me say in my employer showcases, I know insurance doesn't sound too sexy. But now I think we might be looking like that, right? And so that helps build that brand, right? The students are talking, their parents are hearing, wow, Progressive is keeping their commitments. This is awesome. And so, again, hate to do it at the cost and this is not if I could not build my brand and not have this pandemic, I would definitely not make that trade-off, but it certainly does help for sure.
Yeah. Chuck, we've seen a big pullback in VC-backed hiring, for startups, as Jane had mentioned, and Chase has dev centers in big sort of startup ecosystems. What has been your experience in terms of your ability to be competitive for talent? Does this open up new opportunities?
It does. Much like Jane said, we were faced with, a lot of things that all companies were, and we've kept all of our commitments as well. Jane, I don't know what you're talking about. Insurance, banking, I think those are sexy as hell. But obviously, and medical equipment as well. We may be biased. But, it's helped us in several ways. One, folks understand the importance of people know who JPMorgan Chase is. We have a big brand. Our name is very recognizable, in our markets. People know who Progressive is, and people know who Bayer Pharmaceuticals are. But what they don't get to see is, like you had mentioned earlier, Ralph, how the technology that they're working on is actually saving lives. And yeah, that is really cool. Or Jane, from the insurance perspective, how your technologists are helping people to, get insurance in an online fashion where they can't go into, a shop to get their insurance needs. The same thing goes with banking. And this is something we've been pushing for and pushing through for years now is the digitization of pretty much everything, right? So, think about that, on this phone that I'm talking to you on, I can do all of my banking. I can get a refi. It's all enabled with technology. And, many years ago when we were kind of building out our Silicon Valley presence, you want to talk about being in the mecca of sexy companies. You've got every big technology brand out there. And here we are, JPMorgan Chase, trying to compete for talent in that market. And one thing that we did, hear from the technologists is that they wanted to work on something important. They wanted to work on something that had an impact. And once they got to see that, JPMorgan Chase wasn't just a shop of mainframes and dinosaurs, that we were working on cool stuff, that the technology they're working on, impacts millions and millions of users. I mean, if you were to knock on every door across America, JPMorgan Chase is in every other household. So we're in 50% of the households across America with one of our products. That's powerful. That's cool. So I think the fact that, we are stable, we're stable because we've got really great business practices. That is pretty sexy in this type of environment right now. And you get to work on some really cool stuff.
Job security is the new sexy, right? I've got another question here that I think is interesting, and I want to move on to a little bit of, kind of some of the other opportunities that are coming up. But Tom Tomasula, who's the CHRO of Betcher Industries, asks, what are some of the best practices for engaging candidates today? And I want to frame that question a little bit because obviously LinkedIn is a powerful tool, and that's been online and it's been a tool in your toolbox. But, are there other opportunities? Everyone is essentially congregating in one place right now. It's called the internet. So, what is that offering you in terms of engagement opportunities? It's sort of this giant sort of platform. Are you seeing interesting and new opportunities to sort of to reach out and engage audiences in efficient and creative ways that you hadn't before? And I'm just going to leave that open because I'm sure all of you kind of have something, but I'd love to just hear, are there any kind of, what are the corners of the internet that you're finding your talent?
I'll jump in on this one, given that is, that's my bread and butter. So yes, LinkedIn, everybody uses it. I would venture to say, approximately 80% of the technologists across North America have a LinkedIn profile. I know that. Jane's recruiters know that. Ralph recruiters, we all know that. So it's not just about finding somebody on LinkedIn and reaching out with, hey, I've got a great opportunity. You have to build a rapport with folks, right? And it's the same as what it was, prior to all of these technologies existing. So perhaps if I see Ralph's profile out there on LinkedIn, instead of me just firing off an email to him saying, hey Ralph, you ever consider leaving Bayer and coming to JPMorgan Chase? What I might do is perhaps do some research on Ralph and see that he does have a bunch of patents to his name and what those are, so that when I do reach out and engage with him, he can see that I've taken a little bit of time and shown an interest in his background and want to talk about those things. Those are great ways to open a conversation in a digital world, right? Otherwise, you're just, a nameless, faceless spam that they're getting hundreds upon hundreds of. Technology is still hot. There are no magic pools of fantastic Java or C# developers that are just sitting out there unemployed, despite what people may think by seeing the news and seeing stories out there. So it is still a war for talent, and you have to be able to connect with people in a more organic way in a digital world.
So Chuck, and I do have to set the record straight because my boss may be watching this. I am not leaving Bayer for JPMorgan Chase. I think I was just recruited, but I'm not sure. But I did want to follow up just one point on the previous comment, which is, yes, we're seeing more and more that folks, particularly young folks, want that direct connection of being able to see an impact of their work. That is where I personally spend a lot of time, is reminding folks that even in maybe lesser prominent roles, supporting roles, that it might be harder to see how somebody in a supporting role is actually changing medicine, and I often have to speak to that and show how necessary that particular job or function is to make that connection. And that's very, very important. We're seeing folks want is some sort of reminder that the work they do is important. The work they do is impacting, in my case, patient lives, or and in your case is a little bit different. But we spend time highlighting that for certain.
Great. Well, I want to turn to another source of talent that maybe the viewers here aren't fully thinking about, which is talent from within one's organization. So, we've just had these announcements today, 26.5 million unemployment claims. Again, those are shocking numbers. And while it's true that these numbers are huge, it's also true that the layoffs are not happening uniformly in the economy. And the same could be said for businesses. So we're in a situation where there's going to be a massive focus on automation. Resiliency looking to the future is going to be around automation. And certainly this crisis and pushing everyone sort of into their homes, is making, is forcing folks to think about kind of efficiencies coming out of this. And so, there are parts of businesses that are, rendered fairly obsolete at this time, as well as parts of business that are under extreme demand to be able to sort of keep continuity going forward. So, I'm curious to understand from the folks assembled here, if you see opportunities in your business to move talent from one part of the business to another. We saw with the Business Roundtable, I think it was earlier on in the year, announcing that one of the main stakeholders for business is not just the shareholder, but also the employee. So as we look at this and we look at employer brands and corporate social responsibility, are there opportunities to kind of reimagine the talent base within a business? And Jane, I'd like to start with you, because I have to imagine right now, with road traffic down by, I think, 30 to 50%, nationwide, there's a lot less accidents happening on the road. And so, as an example, are there opportunities in the world of auto insurance to look at ways to sort of identify future technology talent in the non-skilled, technical workforce that you currently have?
So certainly you are correct. Claims are down significantly because people aren't out on the roads right now. To repurpose our claims reps now into a technology role at the moment, first of all, that's a business decision that's a little bigger than me, right? So I'm just going to talk from my own experience. To actually repurpose some of those folks into a technology role, by the time we would do that, people are going to be back.
Uh-oh, we lost Jane.
We might have lost Jane there.
Sorry.
Jane's back.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm back. People will be, by the time we could get people repurposed into this role or trained in order to become IT professionals. We are hopeful that people will be back out on the roads, and the claims will then move up. Now, we do look at, kind of off topic, not when we're in the middle of a pandemic, but we are always looking at upskilling proven internal talent. When we have someone in our call center who has come in, acclimated well to our culture, has done a great job, learned the business, and wants to expand their career into, say, a technical role. We are looking at programs, and I actually have put a few together to get some of that internal talent into IT. But it has a long tail. It takes some time. And but that, to me, is just a great, another way to increase employment brand from a different avenue. So come in as a call center rep, and then you can actually move into IT if that, with some help from the company to get you the training you need.
Yeah. I would turn this question also to Chuck. I mean, I would imagine certainly you make a good point, Jane, that these claims adjusters, in all hopes, will be back and working at full steam. There may be other parts of a business where we've experienced the ease. There may be naysayers to online banking who rejected the convenience of cashing a check on your phone, who now have been forced to do so and have realized that it is indeed very convenient to be able to put a check in your bank account using your phone. I wonder if there are opportunities in the world of sort of to transition folks from the world of maybe retail banking or retail sort of operations. And maybe you could speak to, are there any sort of additional benefits maybe around the diversity initiatives as well?
Absolutely. So I'm going to actually kind of throw it back to a couple years ago when Tech Elevator opened up in Columbus, and we started hiring some folks from you. And then I got a call from Katie, and she said, "Chuck, we have a really unusual situation." And I said, "Well, what's that?" She said, "We have somebody from JPMorgan Chase who quit JPMorgan Chase to come to Tech Elevator because she wants to become a software engineer." I was like, holy moly, what in the world is going on here? So we immediately had a conversation with her, and that really sparked conversations that I was able to have with our HR business partners, with our technology partners inside JPMorgan Chase to say, look, here's one of 22,000 employees in Columbus, Ohio at JPMorgan Chase who had the courage, financial capabilities, and family support to quit her job at JPMorgan Chase, where she has been employed for 6 years in operations as a great employee. And she's taken this burden all on herself. So the first thing we did is, after she completed her coursework at Tech Elevator, is we hired her into a software engineering role back at JPMorgan Chase. And then again, the second thing I did is said, like, there have to be more people like her in our company who are great employees who have found a passion for software engineering and want to do this. How do we find them? How do we help them? How do we get them into programs like this? So fast forward to today, where obviously, or where we've utilized Tech Elevator for retraining some of our technology associates who perhaps didn't have software engineering skills but wanted to, BAs, some project managers, some folks who are doing manual testing, and that's gone pretty well. And now we're looking at, okay, how do we expand that out into the non-technology roles at JPMorgan Chase? Like you said, you want to build loyalty and brand. Like, my gosh, retrain your people, change their lives. You have somebody who, is working in perhaps a lower income role, in getting them into software engineering in, a matter of 16, 18 weeks. It's pretty life-changing. It's pretty transformational. So, now we're looking at, okay, we have piloted this in many areas. We've seen what's worked. We've seen what hasn't worked. And I have a lot of stuff I can share on what hasn't worked, or some pitfalls to watch out for. But, I would encourage every large corporation out there that has the resources to continue investing in their own employees, find out what their passions are. If there are roadblocks, knock them down. Figure out ways to, take these people who have been loyal to helping the company succeed in their own small way and help them succeed. It's very rewarding.
That's great. Well, thank you, Chuck. And Ralph, I know you've done some of this yourself with your organization. I'd be curious if you could opine on, there's a certain leap of faith when you're recruiting talent externally that you have to make, right? You just have to ultimately at some point say, okay, I've seen enough to know this, I feel good about this talent. There's an interesting opportunity when you've had an employee at a company for a while, which allows you to sort of interview over the long term. So, Ralph, you've sent some folks for training through our program. What are the attributes that you need to see in employees to be encouraged to make that investment, to continue investing in the development of those individuals?
Yeah, well, let me take a step back. So first, medical device development, software development is traditionally very labor intensive, right? So one of the reasons we have so many colleagues is it's FDA and other regulators have realized with software running on medical devices that you can't test every scenario. So if you can't test it, FDA and others have established pretty rigorous processes. So there's a lot of process burden in the work we do, which means there's lots of folks, lots of bodies sort of, not only coding, but also planning and requirements and software quality and testing. We do a tremendous amount of testing. So one of the things that we've been doing is actually trying to migrate much of our testing to automation or automated testing, and employ different technologies like DevOps, for example. So by freeing up some testing technicians, for example, through automation, through technology, then we can shift them into development areas or coding, for example. And that's one area where Tech Elevator can help us sort of reskilling some of our hands-on folks to be more on the development side, on the engineering side. The second area, which is something we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, but for software engineering folks and leaders within software engineering organizations, recruiting is key, but only about something like, I think I read 10% of graduating college folks are in computer science or computer science related fields. So being able to go beyond that is very, very important. And what we've done in Bayer Radiology is we found bioengineering, for example, in other related chemical engineering fields. If we can tap into those folks, that pool of candidates, and just get them to be open-minded about coming to work for a medical device company. Maybe you're not sitting down writing code on day one, but be open-minded to that idea that you can contribute in other ways for 6 months or a year, and then figure out a test of waters. If you like it, if you want to try it, we can certainly give you the skills. One of the things we do, I personally do, hire much more for potential, for passion, rather than skills, right? We can teach skills. Tech Elevator can teach skills. If we hire somebody who is a lifelong learner, has shown a real appetite to learn, then we can teach all sorts of different skills. So that's one of the things we do, is try to diversify the pool from which we select candidates. And that's been hugely successful for us. We have some of our top talented Bayer Radiology in Pittsburgh are actually not classically trained in the discipline that they're working in today, myself included. It's a trick or a tip. I would best practice, if you will.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, we certainly stand by that at Tech Elevator with, baristas and servers and bartenders and all kinds of different backgrounds coming into the field of technology. It certainly brings diversity of perspective, diversity of backgrounds as well. So, I appreciate you adding that too. I'm curious, to understand certainly around sort of some of the opportunities that exist. There is clearly a crisis, in the state of Ohio, in Michigan, and Pennsylvania, all areas where we have physical locations, as well as on a national level. In sort of the workforce. Any of your organizations getting involved with sort of state and local governments around workforce initiatives? Do you see any opportunities for your organizations around that? We've certainly seen a lot of interest from workforce development folks about how to use our organization as a catalyst to put people back in to the workforce. But I'm curious from your perspectives if you've seen any opportunities along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. So, prior to COVID hitting, I work with a group, which is the Central Ohio Workforce Advisory Council. And it is, educators, it is private business, and the government coming together to make sure that, Ohio is doing everything we can to raise all boats, right? To make sure that everybody has an understanding of what is possible, what is available, and then has access to that education, be it through community colleges, traditional four-year schools, certificate programs, or places like Tech Elevator. Because, at the end of the day, and Ralph knows this and Jane knows this, diverse teams make the best products, period, end of story. At JPMorgan Chase, we understand this, but it's not just diverse from a gender or ethnic perspective. It's diversity of background. When you can get somebody who, was a server, or somebody who's coming out of the medical field that wants to become a software engineer, or was a music production engineer. They bring a skill set to software engineering that isn't taught in college, right? In college, you're learning about your design principles, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, so we've worked very closely with communities to make sure that, we're getting access to more folks and an understanding, and really that begins at the K through 12 grades. We have some very wonderful folks at JPMorgan Chase who are very passionate about this, and as a company, we support them through time and dollars to pursue their passions of this. And, I'm going to throw a shout out to one individual, Paige Presky in Columbus, Ohio. She's a software engineer who has a passion for getting more girls into software engineering. So a couple of years ago, she started reaching out to the local school districts, traditionally in some of the areas where perhaps they don't have strong STEM programs. And she worked with those schools to get 8th grade girls interested in technology and software engineering. This year, obviously, COVID is slowed us down a little bit, but this year she had 800 Central Ohio 8th grade girls prepared to come in to JPMorgan Chase for a full day of workshops, right? Hearing from other female technologists that work at JPMorgan Chase about what they do and how they do it, going through agile workshops, et cetera. So just, enabling our employees who have that passion to go out and do these types of things has been really helpful. And, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, maybe some of these girls will be software engineers at JPMorgan Chase.
So play the long game. I certainly feel that, while we're really kind of still right in the sort of the realization of the extent of the damage of COVID-19, some of our brain power, much of the brain power has been focused on survival, adapting to the new situation. Some of the brain power is focused on, okay, how do we return to whatever the new normal is going to look like, and how do we adapt to that? But I would just encourage everybody who's watching today to reserve some brain power for what are the opportunities for us as well. How do we capture the opportunities that COVID presents to us, whether in our recruiting best practices and reaching broader audiences and building employer brands? How do we play the long game and recognize that kind of the world on the other side of COVID, we're gonna need to rise to meet as well. And so, what activities can we be doing now to do that? How can we emerge stronger on the other side of COVID-19 as individuals, as companies, as communities? I want to make sure, because quite a few of our audience today asked the question about onboarding. What is the virtual onboarding experience, especially when you consider some of the volumes that we're talking about here in terms of hiring? And Jane, when we got together on our preparation call, you mentioned that you have 27 interns and 40 associates starting at Progressive in May and early June. I just would love to know how you're preparing for that and what this new reality looks like for you, given that you've done this for 10 years straight in totally normal circumstances. So how are you doing it?
With lots of Hail Marys. No, you know what I'm doing is looking at my previous processes, everything that I did in person, and figuring out how can we do this remotely. We are so fortunate, all of us now, that we live in a era where we have this technology that will allow us to meet with people face to face, even though you're not, virtually. So really preparing not only the individuals ahead of time a little bit, but also my internal staff as well, the mentors of these interns. Really talking with them about the little bit of an extra lift that it's going to take in order to make sure that the interns feel connected to the project teams and to their work. I also have a great staff member who has worked to prepare a training presentation to the interns. How do you work remotely? For maybe the more seasoned IT professional, we don't really need to deliver that training. But to a college student who stays up all night studying or does their work at 3 a.m. and sleeps till noon, we're going to make sure that we're really clear with them on the expectations that we have for them as far as, here's what we expect of you as a remote worker. Turn your camera on. It's okay. Put a hat on if your hair is not done, right? We want to see your face. Use the technologies that we have. And then I think it's going to be very important for me as the program manager to do a lot of outreach to the interns and then the new hires that follow. Maybe even on a daily basis, just a quick ping. How you doing? What can I do for you? What's not working? Asking those questions so we can get in front of this and ensure that they have the best experience possible given the current situation.
Great, thank you, Jane. I'm curious, Ralph, are you in this process right now with anybody, or are you learning alongside of all of us? Have you got anyone that's onboarding right now?
Yeah. We just brought some folks on. In fact, I did check in to see how things were going because I knew the topic would come up, and lots of I have a management team that takes care of that, the day-to-day stuff. But also to Jane's point, I've encouraged everybody to take my haircut and not worry about combing hair or shaving, and wear any clothes you like as long as there's clothes involved.
Good. What about you, Chuck?
So the big thing for us, because of our our size is our volumes. So we had hired a bunch of people who were supposed to start, and then COVID hit, and we had everybody working remotely who possibly could, and then we've got a backlog of, this isn't just technologists, but we had a backlog of around 3,000 people that we needed to get started remotely, and we've never been able to. We've never started people remotely, so we had to first say, hey, reach outs to all those folks like, hey, you still become an employee on the day we said you become an employee, and your benefits and everything else are in play. It just won't be working until we get this figured out, and we're going to still pay you during this time. So obviously there's a lot of pressure to get this worked out rapidly. It took some it took a whole village of people to get a solution put in place, from our cyber technology folks, our infrastructure folks, our HR operations people, to figure out how we could do this, right? Visually identifying people, looking at their their documentation that we need to look at. But we were able to do it in a pretty short fashion. It's just a big manual lift. So while we're doing this manual lift to get people working remotely from day one, working with the managers to say, hey, like, you've never had to onboard somebody this way. This is what we need you to, just like Jane and Ralph had said, right? Giving the software engineering managers like guidance on how to start somebody remotely. They've never had to do that before. And then I also shared with you, your students at these cohorts that are graduating Tech Elevator. There was some concern about hey, is there going to be the demand and the appetite for hiring folks who are going to need that extra mentorship, that extra hand holding? And as a recruiting organization, our sell to our hiring managers was like, this is probably the strongest class that's ever graduating from a program like this, because they've been thrown into what all of your employees have, which is, immediately going to a remote scenario when they were used to being, in office, in classroom every day. So they already know how to be productive, learn, continue growing in a remote fashion, like stronger than prior classes. So that really shifted some of the thinking for our managers. But what it takes is us getting them there, getting them to think out of the traditional ways that we hire.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. I know a number of questions were submitted a little bit more along kind of, okay, now you've got them, now you've onboarded them, or equally now you've taken an existing employee and moved them 100% virtually. from an employee perspective, how does one sort of manage one's career? How does one stand out from the crowd when you're really so isolated or relatively isolated compared to the water cooler vending machine sort of serendipitous connections that used to exist in the physical world? What advice would you give to kind of employees and team members that have been with you for a while and have moved remote, who are still thinking like, okay, well, how long is this going to go for? How do I manage and sort of accentuate my career?
I can maybe speak to that for a second. So we do have a number of folks who work remotely permanently, and not too many, but prior to COVID, just folks who choose to live in another city and have developed a relationship that we of trust and development results, so we can work out a remote plan. It's certainly the exception, not the norm, although we have different facilities all over the world. So we have little groups in Sydney and in India. We have some leadership out of Berlin, obviously, and some folks in Cleveland, New Jersey. So we do a lot of this. I think the key is the connection, right? Some way, and a lot of my teams do daily stand-ups, right? So now it's a lot of daily video stand-ups. It's maintaining that connection to your core team. Typically all of our development engineers or support engineers are really assigned to one or two major programs. So those teams typically do some type of Scrum daily, stand-up meeting, and really, whether you're remote or whether you're in person, be there physically or be there virtually. That's the key. That connection to your team is I think the key to success.
It's great to hear, and that echoes a question that was submitted by Gary Ruby from Technology Resource Group, which was, what measures have you taken to keep your teams engaged in their remote arrangements, and how have you been able to lift morale? I think there was a lot of sort of exhilaration in the early days of everyone moving remotely, and maybe people have been feeling a little frayed at the edges. It might have something to do with homeschooling children for a number of people. So how are you? What are you doing to keep people engaged? I'd love to hear if there are tools or best practices that you can share with the folks today as well. Jane.
Yeah, so we, of course, are doing a lot of virtual happy hours. We are doing team events together. So last week, I actually hosted Pictionary using Microsoft Teams and the whiteboard with a team. They had a great time. We've created some internal SharePoint sites where people can actually post pictures of their current, new coworkers, their current workspaces, and then also even share tips and tricks on how they are keeping connected with their project teams, keeping connected with their families. And then we even have a section called quarantine recipes. So people can share, because we are all about the food, man. And that is one of the things that I think is killing us. We've all decided that either we're coming back to work 50 pounds lighter or 100 pounds heavier. It's going to be interesting to see who falls into which category, right? So certainly another thing we did that was a lot of fun with my team is Monterey Bay Aquarium has some live webcams. And so we together took a tour of the Monterey Bay Aquarium and got to see all kinds of really cool wildlife, sea wildlife, and generated a lot of great discussions there. Progressive has an amazing art collection, the largest contemporary corporate art collection in the country. And so we're touring museums together as well. And so it just, that again, going back to Ralph's comment, that keeps the connection, having conversations about otters and art and recipes, keeps that connection, which helps keep the conversations going about the work that needs to be done.
Great. I've got one last question, and I think we'll probably wrap things up here today, but it was a question really kind of on the business of recruiting. So kind of coming back to maybe the opportunities that technology brings to us, have you seen, efficiencies, and by efficiencies, not just sort of, Chuck, you'd mentioned before how valuable the video component is to just move quickly, but are you at a point right now where you've been able to evaluate sort of the cost equations, whether it's new technology investments or just sort of speeding up the hiring process? Have you got a chance to reflect on, does this sort of, does this new environment offer any financial efficiencies to the recruiting process as well?
Well, yes, in that it's limited the events that we go to and the events that we host, so we're not spending money on those things like we have in the past. Yeah, I don't want to talk too much to to the financial gains from an efficiency standpoint. Again, other than that, but what it's really done is it's gotten us to and all the recruiters on our team and our hiring managers to think differently, right? And changing the hiring culture is something that is very difficult to do in an organization of any size that has history. Ralph, you made a very significant point earlier, which is hiring to aptitude versus to skill set. When I started at JPMorgan Chase 13 years ago and had a very angry hiring manager that we inherited, why couldn't my team find folks with Java and Spring framework? And I'm like, well, they brought you 4 folks with great Struts framework. They're like, I don't want Struts, I want Spring. I'm like, but if they can learn Struts, they can learn Spring. He's like, that's not what I want. So, fast forward to today where it's like, now I just want someone who can write good code, who can think through problems, who can solve problems. I can teach them frameworks. .NET, hey, they want to learn Java, we'll teach them Java. It's just a syntax difference. So it's really the efficiencies have been gained in those areas versus the monetary cost per hire, which is I think where your maybe question was directed towards.
Yeah, great. Well, unless anybody has anything they'd like to add, I want to say a huge, huge thank you to all of you for sharing your thoughts today, the experiences that you bring. You're coming from different industries, different geographies, and I know that there's a lot of questions that folks have right now around just how to navigate these unprecedented times and how to navigate one's recruiting strategy. So hopefully what we've been able to talk about today has given people some good nuggets of knowledge and also some, the beginnings of some of their own sort of discovery as they continue to navigate the situation. So I want to thank all of you very much for participating today. On behalf of Tech Elevator, thank you to everybody who's come and joined us today in this panel discussion for being part of this conversation. So with that, thank you to all of your panelists. Thank you to all the attendees. And we'll sign off. Many thanks.
Thank you, Anthony. It's been fun and being involved. Thank you.
Great to have you.
Indeed.